welcome back to another Teacher Time with Kelsie. Today I am going to be sharing a story with you all that incorporates some movement. So movement is a really great tool for when you're telling stories. It kind of is similar to sound in that it really helps get the listener involved in the story and helps them really imagine the world that you're trying to tell them about and really kind of get into the actual story that you're sharing. So it's a lot of fun to add movements to stories, and it's pretty easy too. Sometimes I'll tell a story and then I'll go back and add the movements later. The story that I'm going to share with you today is actually a pretty short story that I wrote with some of the Little Owl children. And what we did is we just kind of made it up as we went along, and I noticed that while I was telling it, a lot of children were kind of creating the movements on their own. So I ended up adding those movements as part of the story anytime I retold it, and would invite children to join the story by doing the movements with me as I shared it. So it's always really fun to do that, and it usually makes even short stories feel like they have a lot more to them when there's all those different parts. So I hope that you'll get to get involved, do some of these movements with us, and hopefully just enjoy the story that I'm about to share. So I will have you grab your favorite drink, find your cozy spot, and we can get started. So this story starts with a group of children who went to a school called Little Owl. And every day this group of children would wake up in the morning, they'd eat breakfast, and then their parents would drive them to school. And at school, they would play inside, they would play outside, and every day they would just have so much fun being together and trying new things. But just outside of Little Owl, there lived a witch. And this witch didn't like when people played. And she didn't like when people were happy. And she didn't like when people were together. So she decided that she wanted to stop these kids at Little Owl from playing. And she thought of a plan. The next day when the kids came to Little Owl, just like before, their parents dropped them off. And just like before, they played in the classroom. And just like before, they played in the backyard. But when they were playing out in the backyard, what they didn't know is that the witch had gotten on her broomstick and flown into the clouds where she was right above the children. While she was on her broomstick, she took a little pouch. And this is where you can start doing some of the movements. You can grab your little pouch just like the witch. She opened it up. She put her hand inside, and she got a little bit of magic dust. She took it and she sprinkled it on the children. And these children, they just kept playing and playing and playing, and the dust came down and it sprinkled all over them. But they couldn't see the witch up in the clouds, so they had no idea what was happening. And that day they went home with their parents, and they went to bed at night, and they didn't know that the witch had done anything to them until they woke up the next morning. You guys can stretch too. Imagine that you're waking up. Well, when they woke up, you know what they saw? They looked down and they realized that their bed was giant. They looked up around them and they noticed that everything in their room was giant too. And then they looked at themselves and they realized things in their room weren't giant. They had shrunken to be so small that they were the size of an ant. Their moms and dads came inside and they looked for them, but they didn't see the kids. So they said, oh, maybe they just went to school on their own. So the moms and dads left for the day, and the kids were going, oh my goodness, what do I do? So they decided that they needed to go to Little Owl to figure out what was happening. Maybe their friends would know. Maybe the teachers would know. They had to see. So they got out of their bed, and this is where you can do some more movements to join us. Remember, you're super, super tiny. You just shrunk. So you're going to walk out of your bed with teeny little ant feet. Tiptoe, tiptoe. They tiptoed out of their bed, and it took them hours and hours and hours. And then they tiptoed out of their room, and it took them hours and hours and hours. And then they tiptoed out of their house. Their little ant walks took them hours and hours and hours. And then they had to walk all the way to Little Owl. All the kids of all of Little Owl had to walk and walk with their little teeny tiny feet all the way to the school. And it took them days and days and days to do it. But finally they made it. And they all came together and they said, "Oh my goodness, what has happened to us?" They were all so tiny, but they had no idea what went wrong. And then, all of a sudden, a little ant, this time a real ant, came up to them and said, "I know what happened." And the ant told them that what they didn't know is that while they were playing just earlier that week, a witch had come and put a magic spell on all of them to make them very, very tiny. All the children were so shocked. They said, "Oh my goodness, well, what do we do? How do we get to be our regular size?" And the little ant just told them, "I think you'll need to find the witch." So all the kids at Little Owl came together and they got directions from the ant about where they could find the witch, and then they walked. Get your little ant feet ready again. You're gonna walk. And they walked. And they walked all the way out of Little Owl. And they walked, and they walked, and they walked all the way to the witch's house. And you can imagine this took them the whole day because they had just teeny tiny feet. But when they walked and walked and walked, finally, they got to the witch's house. When they got to the witch's house, they all together knocked on her door. And you can do this part with me too. If there's something hard next to you, you can knock on it. Ready? The witch was in the house and she looked around. She heard what sounded like a knock, but it was so small. But she thought, it's probably nothing. Then all the little owl, teeny tiny little owl kids knocked again, as loud as they could this time. This time the witch was inside and she said, "Oh, I definitely heard something." So she went over to her door and she peeked, but she didn't see anything. So she opened up her door and looked outside. But you know what? She still didn't see anything because all the little owl kids were so tiny. When the witch opened the door, what she didn't know is that all the little owl kids snuck inside. And when she shut the door, they were all inside her house. And the ant had told them that she got her magic spell out of a bag. So together they all came into a little group and they looked around and tried to figure out where this magic bag was so that they could turn themselves back to regular size. They looked in the living room, but they didn't see the magical bag there. They looked in the kitchen, but they didn't see the magical bag there. And then they looked on the kitchen table. And sure enough, on their kitchen table, they saw the magic bag. They got so excited. They knew they could get the magic bag now. They knew where it was, but it was all the way on top of the table. And they were still so tiny. So they had to walk over to the table. Get your little ant feet. Walk over to the table. And they had to walk, and they even tried to walk as fast as they could. This time try to run with your little ant feet. They tried to run and run so that they could get this bag. And when they got to the table, you know what they had to do? They had to climb on top of each other, on top of their shoulders, and make a really big stack of little owl kids until they could reach the top of the table. Luckily, they were all still so small that the witch didn't even know they were there. She walked right by them and went into her kitchen, started cooking her dinner, and just next to the witch, the little owl kids were almost at the top of the table. They were climbing up each other's bodies and stacking themselves so high to get to that table. And then they made it. The kid who was at the highest point at the very top was able to grab the bag and just pull it down enough where it fell off the table. The witch turned around. She heard it fall, but she didn't really know what had happened, so she just went back to cooking. The little owl kids now had the magic bag on the floor. They took all their little, teeny tiny ant-sized hands, and they worked together to open the bag. So you can help take your little teeny tiny hands and open the bag. And once it was open, they each took just a little pinch of the magic dust, and they sprinkled it over themselves. Shh. And you know what happened? All of a sudden, poof, they turned back in to normal-sized people. The witch, who didn't even know they were inside, looked now at this house full of normal-sized little owl kids, and her face just went, and you know what they did? They chased that witch out of her house, down the street, and as fast as they could, they ran after her. Remember, you're big now, so you're gonna run with big footsteps. Ready? They ran after her as fast as they could. And when they caught up to her, they grabbed some of that magic dust and, ready? They threw it at her. And they turned that witch into ribbit, a frog. The witch that was now a frog hopped away and into a pond, splash, where she disappeared forever. The kids all cheered, woo! They were finally normal size again, and luckily, they could get back home without having to walk for days and days and days. The kids all walked back to their homes. Do your normal steps now. And walked into their rooms where they jumped in their beds and went to sleep for a cozy night's sleep where hopefully they would wake up to still be the regular size in the morning. So that's the end of our story. It doesn't have a lot of movements in it, and some of them are kind of small, but it is fun even sometimes when stories just have a few movements. Might even be just one movement that you repeat, or maybe a couple that you do just one time in the story too. So it's just fun to add that little bit of extra thing that you can do and something that your listeners can do just to have a little fun while they're hearing the story be told as well. So I hope that you all enjoyed that story and got to have a little fun with doing the movements along with it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again on another Teacher Time with Kelsie.